Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Kesubos Chav Ches. We begin right at the Mishnah, which is on Chav Zayin Amud Beis 6 from the bottom. So we have been learning about a city which was attacked, which was under siege. We learned that the Kohanos, that is the wives of the Kohanim, are usher to their husbands, who are concerned that perhaps the Goyim were involved with them, they mistreated them, they abused them, in which case, when it's the wife of a Kohen, she is usher on him, even though it was a forced interaction. We know that the Kohen has higher standards. Eshes Kohen is usher on her husband, even if it was an oines experience. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. So Rabbi Zechariah lived at the end of the second Beis Hamikdash. He experienced the Churban, and he testified. He declared, "Look, I'm a Kohen, but I kept a good eye on my wife. Nobody got near her. Hamoin hazeh. This dwelling, this is a lashon of shvu. I make a shvu, an oath. I swear in the name of the Shechina that rests in this Beis Hamikdash. Lo yizaza yada miteich yadi. Her hand never parted from mine. I kept a close eye on her. Misha shenichnasu oidei kechavim liYerushalayim, from the moment that the Goyim entered Yerushalayim b'asher yatzu until they left. She was safe and sound. Is she okay for me?" Amr Loi, the Chachamim respond, no, it's a halacha, no exceptions. Ein adam meid al atzmai. One cannot testify on his own behalf. You're speaking about yourself and your family. There is no ne'emanas. You need independent verification for us to treat her as tahar, as we learned yesterday. Tana, we learned in a brisa. V'achal v'kein, even though she was usher on him, right, because he was a kohen, he took care of her. It would seem from the Gemara, they didn't get divorced. In fact, they lived alongside each other, but they were careful not to interact, and not even to experience yichud together, to go into isolation together. V'achal v'kein, even though she was usher on him, yichud la'bayis b'chatzeret, he designated for her a home in his courtyard, so he gave her where to live, and he took care of her. But they were so careful from even a slight semblance of yichud. And the Mefarshim explained, perhaps because they knew the truth that they were really mutter, they were just complying with the din d'Rabbanan, so that creates a greater temptation. And therefore they were careful from any notion of yichud, in addition to the fact that it was also a long-term arrangement, in which case you have to be careful from all yichud-related activities. And this is what they did. When she would leave the courtyard and go out into the street, she would go ahead of her sons, who would trail behind her. The concern being that if she stands behind and they go ahead, perhaps they'll leave the town, the chatzar, and she'll stay behind, which will constitute yichud between him and Rabbi Zechariah. And likewise, when she entered from the street, she had the same arrangement. When she would come back in, she would trail behind her sons, who would walk in first. Because otherwise, if she comes in first, perhaps they stay behind the street, which might constitute yichud between him, Reb Zechariah, and his wife. Boy Abaye asks Abaye, "Ma'u lasis b'grusha ken?" This arrangement works even for a grusha. Rashi explains, talking about a kohen who divorced his wife and he can no longer retake her. That's the halacha. A kohen cannot retake his divorcee. Can they live together in the same, neighborhood, in the same chatzar? Or it's too close for comfort? Should we compare it to the case of Rabbi Zechariah or not? Perhaps over there by Rabbi Zechariah, it was a kula, a leniency applied to his specific case due to the fact that it was only a chumrah, midrabanan, the fact that a captured woman is considered tameh, it's only a chumrah, so we allow for this type of arrangement. But when it comes to a gerusha with a kohen, which is an issa deraisa, perhaps it's too close for safety. Perhaps no difference. She could live in the same chatzar as long as they're careful not to interact. Hashmaya comes a raya that it's asr. The Sanya, the Brisa says, "Hamagarish es ishtoi." If one divorces his wife, we're speaking about an ordinary Yisrael. So he divorced his wife, and then she remarries. She shouldn't remarry and live in that same neighborhood. Taisa says neighborhood means, within 3 homes next to each other. So there's a concern that perhaps, because they have a history and they have some, common language, it might be an enticing situation which can come to Avera. So that's by a Eishes Yisrael who remarried. Now, if this fellow who divorced his wife was a Kohen, so in this case, it's even worse because even when she's not yet remarried, she's already usher on him, minat Torah. So in this case, she shouldn't live in the same mavi. So the mavi was sort of an alleyway off the street, which would branch out into various chatzeros, courtyards. So by a kohen with his divorcee, we're more machmer. You can't even live in the same area. So bottom line, we have an answer to our question. A kohen divorces his wife. You can't go near her, even if she's not yet remarried, because here it's an issa d'oraisa if he interacts with her after divorce. So why did Rabbi Zechariah live together in the same chutzner? B'shvuya hikilu was just a chumra d'rabbanan, so you allow for that arrangement. The Brisa continues, Im hoya kvar katan. If we're speaking about a small-sized town, which Taisus explains, presents a greater concern of interaction, small population, they'll bump into each other inevitably. So over there, you have to be more careful. Zahaya Masa. So actually, this was a story, Halacha L'Maisa, which was presented to the Chachamim. V'amran, they said, Kfar Katan, Nidan Kishchuna. If it's a small-sized town, we treat it like a shchuna, as though it's mamash just next door, in which case, we have to take extra precaution. So bottom line is, regarding our question, how close can they live to each other? So, it depends. By a shibuya, since it's only a chumrah, even in the same chatzar, would be okay. If it's an Eishes Yisrael who remarried, and the same shchuna is asr. If it's an Eishes Kohen, even an unmarried Eishes Kohen who got divorced, so he divorced her and she's still unmarried, that would be asr even in the same mavi. And Tosfos says because it's more enticing, she's not yet married, so we're more machmer. Now comes the question. Sure, they can't live in close proximity. Who's meant to move? Does he have to move away from her, or she from him? Mi nitcha mipnei mi. Who has to move away because of the other person? Tashma the Sanya, the Brisa says, he nitches mipanav. She has to move away. Ve'ein u nitcha mipanea. He doesn't need to be displaced because of her. If it happened to be her courtyard, so she owns the house in that courtyard, this is her, domain, then we send him away. Who nitche mipanea? He has to leave because of her. Iboy lehu. Here comes a question. What if both the Isha and the Isha own a home in this chatzar? Now, who's going to be displaced? Tashma, we'll go back to that Brisa. He nitches mipanav. She has to be displaced. She has to leave because of him. That's the Brisa. But my askidan, what is this scenario? What are we speaking about here? We're speaking that he owns the home in that chutzner. It's his place. Pshita, of course, that she has to leave. It says this is his place. Vela b'chutzner shelo. We're speaking that she owns the house in that chutzner. So this is her domain. That can't be. V'atanya, imay is a chutzner shelo, hu nitchem paneh. The Brisa itself explains that if it's her place, he has to leave because of her. So what does the Brisa mean when it says she has to leave because of him? Elolav kai gavna. Apparently we're speaking about this specific case. They're both local homeowners. And the Brisa maintains that she has to leave. No, says the Gemara, maybe not. Dilma de agir megar. Maybe they're not actual homeowners, they're renters. In which case it's not so difficult to pick up and leave. In that case we compel her to leave. But suppose they're both homeowners in this place, what would be the halacha then? We're not sure. My havela. So what's the conclusion on this question? Tashma, here comes a raya. This was when the Navi warned Chizkiah that he'll be given into the hands of Sancherev. Hine Hashem metatach. Hashem will, displace you till tala gover, like the displacement of a man. Why specifically a man? It's more severe, more difficult. Vama Rav till tuli de gaver. Displacement of a man is much more difficult. Koshem de itisa. He takes it more. It takes it harder than the moving around of a woman who's more flexible and adaptable. A man is set in his ways. He's got his place, his neighborhood, his shul, his chaver. So that's the conclusion to our shaila. if they have both equal rights to the area, they both own the home in this chutzner, who leaves? Since it's more difficult for the man to leave, we compel the Isha to move away. So bottom line is, typically the Isha moves away unless she owns the house and the chutzner and he does not. In that case, she gets priority. Toner Rabbanan. We have to take precautions to avoid any improper interaction between the Ish v'Isha who were formerly married. We're speaking, of course, about a kohen who divorced his wife, who cannot retake her. So we have to take extra precautions. Toner Rabbanan, we learned in the Bryce. Lava himena b'nichsi avia. Suppose the kohen borrowed from his wife while they were married. He borrowed from the nechasim of her parents, of the nichsim milug, which she brought into the marriage. So now she's looking to get repaid. But now they're divorced. She may not directly contact him. We're concerned about interaction, and therefore, eino nifras eloi de achar. She can only collect on her debt by way of an intermediary. So there has to be a go-between to take care of it. Omar of Sheshes, in fact, if they both come to us to a din Torah, we just ignore them. We don't pay attention to them. They're not meant to directly interact with each other. Rav Papa Omar, not only that, Shemuti mishamtinalu. We put them in cherem. Rav Huna B'rei Rav Shua Omar, even further, Nagudi nami nagdinalu. We strike them. We give them malchus for this type of interaction. They should have somebody going between them. Omar of Nachman, Tana, we learned in a brayso called Be'evel Rabbasi, a Masechta called, we call it Masechta Smachos today. When does this pose a concern? If they were married and then got divorced. But if they were only engaged and then got divorced, there isn't much relationship there. Nifras aydei atzma, she can collect her debt directly. Why? She'ein li b'gaspa, because he's not, close emotionally with her, and therefore there's no concern. In fact, there was a story. A man and a woman who had previously been engaged. So he was a kohen and then he divorced her from engagement. They came to Rava to present their case. So Rav Ada was sitting there. He was watching the proceedings. Uki Rava Shlucha ben Tayu. So Rava decided to appoint a shliach to, be the go-between between the Isha and the Isha. Since they had been divorced, we don't want interaction. So he asked, Rava, what's the point? Why do we need to do this? They were merely engaged, not yet married. Did Rav Nachman tell us, in the name of the Brisa, it's only a concern if they were previously married, but in this case, they were only engaged. So Rava says, pay close attention to what's going on. Look at their interaction. I'm noticing the Kogaisi Ba'adadi, they're a bit close to each other emotionally, and in this case we have to take extra precaution. This is an exception to the rule. There was another version of this story that Loyuki Rava Shliach ben Tayu. So the Arus and the Arusa, who had been previously engaged, now came to Rava for a din Torah, and Rava did not place a shliach between them. He allowed them to, confront each other directly. So Rav Ada asked him, why not? Why don't you appoint a shliach to go between them? So Rava says, there's no need. They had only been engaged beforehand. We learned in the Brisa. In this case, there's no concern. Rav Ada told him, but this is different. That only applies when they're not emotionally close with each other. But these two, I see it's different. I noticed that Gaisi Badadi, they're emotionally close, in which case we have to take that extra precaution. So bottom line is, if the kohen and his divorcee come to din Torah, we ignore them. Perhaps Cherem, perhaps Malchus, they need to have a go-between. But that's only when they were married and then divorced. But only engaged, there's no concern, except when we see otherwise. Continues the Mishnah. So typically, a proper aid is a gadol, an adult, who speaks about an experience which he had experienced when he was already a gadol. What if a gadol comes along and says, Rabbi Yisai, I've experienced something when I was a youngster, before I became bar mitzvah, and now I want to present that story to you. So typically it doesn't work. Except when it pertains to dinim d'Rabbanan, when the Chachamim were makel to accept even the testimony of a gadol who's speaking about events long past that occurred when he was a katan. Ve'elu, in the following cases, ne'emanen lahoid begudlan. This fellow is ne'eman to testify after turning an adult. Mashro bekutnan, what they've experienced when they were children. So this child turned adult is believed in the following 5 cases. And primarily we're speaking about dinim d'Rabbanan, and we have a kula to believe him. For instance, ne'eman adam leimar, zek sav yada shel abba. There's a shtar that needs to be certified. Remember, certification is only required by the Rabbanan. So this child turned adult testifies, look, this signature, oh, that's my father's signature. It's genuine, it's real. V'zek sav yada shel Rebbe, this is my Rebbe's signature. V'zek sav yada shel achi, this is my brother's signature. He's believed. Example number 2. We have an Isha who's collecting her Kesubos. She claims she married as a Besula. I need to get 200. And this fellow will support her story. Zachar Hayisi, I recall, this woman went out to the wedding wearing the hinuma, that veil of Verisha Parua. Hair was spread out, indicative of a Besula status. He's believed she collects 200. Next example, Vashahaya Ish Pliny. There's a question regarding the status of this person. Is he a kohen or not? So this child turned adult testifies, I remember, back in school. Shaya explained during our school days, my classmate used to get out early. Vilitva, to be toivel, lechel betruma, to go have his truma. That's a right that he's a kohen. Or he says, he used to be allotted a portion at the granary, together with the other kehanim. And this supports his kahuna status. What else can this child turned adult claim? This too is a din d'Rabbanan. You have a field in which there was a grave which was plowed over. We're concerned that perhaps some bones were strewn about which have the capacity to be metame. So mid-Rabbanan, the entire area is considered a makom tami, not minat Torah. Minat Torah, Tesis explains, is it's tar because Suffolk Tuma B'Rishus Rabbim is tar, but here it's a din d'Rabbanan with machmer, lest they come into contact with a little bone. So until what point? Well, what are the boundaries of the Beis HaPras? Typically it's 100 amma from the Makam HaKever, and this child turned adult will point to the boundary. V'hamokam hazeh Beis HaPras. Beis HaPras ends right here, and going forward, it's beyond the Beis HaPras. It's Torah. This is how Torah explains the halacha. He's coming to be matar, the area outside the Beis HaPras. He's Neman. One more example. V'adkan hayinu boin b'Shabbos. This pertains to the boundary, the Tchum Shabbos. Up until where a person can walk on Shabbos, 2,000 amma out of the city, ends right here. That's where he's coming to testify. He's believed because again, this is a din d'Rabbanan. So we have 5 examples of ne'emanis. Common denominator, dinim d'Rabbanan. But aval ein adam ne'eman leimar derech hayil pleni b'makam hazeh. But this child turned adult can't speak about financial matters. Reuven has a pathway right going through here. These are financial matters which you need to aid him, to proper aid him. Or he'll say ma'amad or misped. These are areas in which they would conduct a hesped or the nicham avelim. So he can say, well, ma'amad and misped hayil pleni b'makam hazeh. This fellow owns this area for his ma'amad and his misped. For this he's not neman. For this he need to proper aid him, and not a child turned adult. So we speak about various halachas where this child turned adult is neman. But Amar Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, of course, one person is not neman. He needs 2, right? Let's say for kiyum hashtar, you need to aid him. So true, we'll trust this fellow, but he needs somebody with him who shares the story. V'hu sheyesh gadol imoy, provided there's a proper adult with him. So since there's a proper adult with him who's speaking about an experience that he experienced during adulthood, we allow this child turned adult to join him together and complete the pair of Edom. So what's the first example in the Mishnah? Ksav yodeh shel abba kiyum hashtar. We have fathers, rebbes, and brothers' handwriting. Aren't they all just variations of the same halacha? Why are they all needed? Each one has a chiddush. The Ashmin and Aviv. If we only mention father's signature, it makes sense that he recognizes it, because son and father spend a lot of time with each other. Aval, Rabbi, but to speak about his Rebbe's signature, who's to say he remembers? V'yashmin and Rabbi. If we mention Rebbe, perhaps there's a reason why we trust him, Mishum de Islay, aim say the Rabbi, because of the fear that he has of his Rebbe. Awe, fear, respect. He pays close attention to everything his Rebbe does. He follows his every move and he recognizes his signature. Aval, Aviv, Leiba, by father, that doesn't really apply. Perhaps it's different, and that's why we mentioned both. He's believed on both. V'yashmin and Tarti. If we only mention these two, I would say each one has an advantage. Aviv d'shchech kabei, by father, well, he spends a lot of time with his father. V'rabbi, the Islay aim say, by the Rebbe, he has the Ema factor. So we trust him when he says he recognizes their handwritings. Of course, by the way, we're speaking that his father passed away when he was a katan, obviously, right? Aval achiv d'leslay lo yehava lo yehava, but brother's signature. Brother doesn't have any of these features. Not shchiach kabei, not aim say, emalei perhaps. You can't believe that he actually recognizes his brother's signature, which he saw many years before Kamash 1. The Chiddush is yes. Why? Why do we believe this child turned adult? Kivan the Kiyim Shtaris with the Rabbanon. Let's remember the concept of certifying a shtar is only with the Rabbanon. And Rashi explains because in Torah, every aid signed on a shtar is considered fully interrogated. It's Kimisha Nechkero Idusum de Bezin. In Torah, a handwritten, Eidos, a signature on a shtar, perfectly acceptable, and we don't need certification. It's different than just writing, like a story. It's part of a shtar. It has chashivas. It has ne'emanos. This is only with the Rabbanon. This whole concept of kima shtar is the Rabbanon, and therefore he knew Rabbanon trusted this fellow with the Rabbanon in a matter pertaining simply to a din de Rabbanon. The next halacha in the Mishnah is regarding a besula. Zochar, Yisai, recall, she went out to the wedding in full celebration. The question here is, my timer, why is he believed? We're speaking about dinei mamonus, financial matters, which he's trying to, influence. And he's a child turned adult. Why is he believed? Answer, Kivan daroiv nashim besula nises. Chances are she was a besula. For the most part, women married as a besula. So she has a roiv on her side. So now when he's coming to support her story, it's only Gili Milsa Ba'almui. He's just trying to clarify and confirm it. Because it's really, questionable because there was no koil, there was no celebrate. We don't remember, and that casts doubt on the fact that she was a psula. But he's coming to dispel that doubt. He's coming to confirm her status. So really, he's not generating a halacha. He's simply supporting and confirming a pre-existing notion. What else is he naman? Oh, my classmate, he's to go be toivel, eat his truma. That's a right that he's a kohen. Why is that a right that he's a kohen? Maybe he's a slave of a kohen who also has the ability to eat truma. So how do you know that he's a kohen? Answers the Gemara, the very fact that he was sitting in cheder and yeshiva learning Torah. That's a right that he's not an eved. That's a right to Reb Shmuel Levi. Reb Shmuel Levi. Also, Adam Shilamades Avdei Torah. One is not allowed to teach us Eved Torah. Many Mefarshim learn because for this very reason, because it might appear that he's really a kohen, so we avoid teaching him Torah. The fact that they're sitting together in class proves that he's a kohen and not an Eved. V'loi, really, he doesn't learn Torah. V'atanya lo fahimenu Rabbi. We have a question regarding the status of a certain person. Is he an Eved or not? So let's say Rabbi, his master, borrowed money from him. I'm not speaking about a kohen, just a regular person. And the question is, are you perhaps an Eved? So Rabbi, if we saw that his master borrowed money from him, or his master appointed him as a caretaker over the estate, which isn't something typically you put in the hands of an Eved, tefillin b'fnei Rabbi, or this fellow was wearing tefillin in front of his alleged master, or this fellow goes into shul and gets an aliyah, reads 3 psukim in the Torah, it would appear that he's not an Eved. No. Hareza lo yatz l'cheres doesn't prove anything regarding his status. He can't go free. Although typically, these are not, Eved-related activities, you never know. It doesn't prove anything. Bottom line is, it would appear that an Eved can learn Torah. In contrast to what you just told me, that an Eved does not learn Torah. Big difference, says the Gemara. Hassam, in that case, the Ikri, Eved Midaita. The Eved just chanced upon, the opportunity. He went and he chapped the Aliyah, he read in the Torah. That could happen. What we're speaking about is the Kanoig Be'minig Banim. He's treating him like a son, he's sending him to the yeshiva and all that. That only happens if he's really a son, not an Eved. The fact that this child turned adult can testify about him, that he was his classmate, etc., is a raya that he's not an Eved. Rather, he's a full-fledged son. The fact that he's eating Truma is a raya that he's a son of a Kohen. Now, as we mentioned, all these ne'emonos pertain only to din and Rabbanon. So lit balechel b'truma, when we say that he is testifying that he had his truma, and now he can go and, based on this account, go ahead and get truma, but truma de rabbanon. Oh, we have to be very careful to only feed him truma de rabbanon, because that's how far the ne'emanos goes. It only travels up until truma de rabbanon. Rashi says 2 examples of truma de rabbanon are truma outside Eretz Yisrael, or even in Eretz Yisrael, non-grain olives and wine, any pears other than those primary products are considered truma de rabbanon. Another way to prove that this fellow was a kohen, he would go to the granary and collect his truma with all of us. Asks the Gemara, similar to before, still, how do you know that he's a kohen? Maybe he's a slave of a kohen collecting for his master. Tanan Kamanda Omar, this Mishnah proves. This Mishnah is consistent with a shita that holds Ein Cholken Truma LeEved Ela Im Kain Rabbi Yehuda. We never hand Truma to the Eved at the granary unless he's standing together with his master. We don't want people to perceive him as a Kohen. The Sanya. Where do we find this Machlekes? Ein Cholken Truma LeEved Ela Im Kain Rabbi Yehuda. Divi Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, indeed, we do not allot a portion of Truma to an Eved at the granary unless he is accompanied by his master. We don't want anybody to falsely perceive this fellow as being a proper Kohen. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. And Rabbi Yossi actually is speaking about a very specific case where there was a suffix, whether he's an Eved or a Kohen. How did that happen? We actually had this in Yivamis. You may recall we had a Kohenes, a woman Kohen who gave birth together with her maidservant in the same room, and they mixed up the children. So every one of them is really a suffix. He could be a proper Kohen, he could be the Eved of a Kohen. Right? So now, can he go and collect Truma at the granary? Rabbi Yossi Omer, yes. Either way, he can claim like this. Either way, I'm deserving of Truma. If I am a Kohen myself, Tanuli bishvil atzmi. Give me the Truma by my own right. If it turns out that I'm really the slave of a Kohen, Tnuli bishvil Rabbi. Hand me the Truma on account of my master. So it's clear that according to Rabbi Yossi, even an Eved Kohen collects Truma. What's the background to this machlekes? What is it based on? According to Rabbi Yehuda, he does not get. According to Rabbi Yossi, he does. It's based on another concept. Because in Rabbi Yehuda's locale, if you see a person collecting Truma, they would consider him a full-fledged Kohen regarding lineage as well. He's a Kohen miyuchas, and therefore they have to be careful. Only to hand Truma to a real Kohen, otherwise it might be falsely perceived as a confirmation of his kahuna. But in Rabbi Yossi's place, they didn't have this system. Just because a person takes Truma doesn't give him a pass for yichus. Therefore, it was perfectly okay to hand Truma to an Eved. Nobody will consider him as a Kohen. So bottom line is our Mishnah, which seems to indicate that collecting your portion at the Gurn confirms your kahuna. The question was, no, maybe I'm a Kohen, he's an Eved. No, they wouldn't give it to the Eved, in accordance with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Here comes an interesting story. Tanya, Honorable Lezer Rabbi Yossi, miyamai, throughout my lifetime, I was never involved in Edus. Perhaps specifically Edus of a Kohen, or whatever. I was never involved in testifying. In fact, one time I got involved in Edus, and I blew it. And because of me, they consider an Eved to be a Kohen. Asks the Gemara, how could that be? How can Hashem allow that to happen? Hello, Salkadaitach. You really mean that they considered an Evet to be a Kohen because of the Tzaddik's testimony? Hashta, look. Uma behemten shel tzaddikim, even the animal belonging to a tzaddik. Famous story of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair's donkey who refused to eat something unkosher. Even the behemoth of a tzaddik is protected from something improper. Maybe Hashem doesn't bring them to a pitfall. Tzaddikim atzmon like koshken. Of course, the tzaddik himself, Hashem will prevent him from coming to pitfall and causing others to sin, especially as Tosfos points out regarding food-related matters which are more severe, more internal, more personal. So it can't be. Ella, rather, it was almost. What he meant is that they were about to consider an Eved as a Kohen based on my testimony. What happened? How could that have happened? There was confusion. Look, Chaza ba'asad Rabbi Yesi. What happened was Rabbi Yesi observed something in the town of Rabbi Yesi. What did he see? He saw this fellow, let's call him Shmerel, was given Truma. Okay. Va'azan, then later on he went ahead, Va'asid ba'asad Rabbi Yehuda. He was in Rabbi Yehuda's town, and there was a whole discussion regarding Shmerel's, yichus. And Rabbi Yesi says, sure, I saw him having Truma. And in Rabbi Yehuda's town, they considered that to be a confirmation of his Kahuna status. But in actuality, he was not a Kohen. You know why? Because the story took place in the other city, where they were not makpid, in Rabbi Yesi's city. So because he took that information and brought it here, that created confusion. But they caught it at the last moment, and he was not elevated to Kahuna. What else is this child turned adult believed to speak about? Another example of a halacha d'Rabbanan. The Beis HaPras ends right here. My time, and why is he believed? You would think it pertains to Tumah, which is D'oraisa. Answer is Beis HaPras d'Rabbanan. This concept is only with the Rabbanan. We explained the name of Tosfos. Really, it's a suffix Tumah out in the open. The halacha is a suffix Tumah b'shus rab mistar. But here the Chacham will machmer. Tosfos explains because it's an ongoing concern. There's always, it's a recurring situation. It's not like there's Tumah there which you won't get close to. You know where it is. You keep away. Here, there's bones strewn around, and we don't want people to take it lightly. They made it tummy. But it ends right here. And that's what he can testify about. My time of Beis HaPras Rabbanan, this whole concept of Beis HaPras only Rabbanan, as we will find several leniencies pertaining to this halach, which prove our point that it's only with the Rabbanan. Number one, a person could blow his way through the Beis HaPras, blowing away the dirt, and noticing whether or not there are bones, and this way he's safe. This is a kula because it's the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, another kula is Beis HaPras shenidash tor. Beis HaPras, which was heavily trampled upon, is considered tor in my time. And why is it tor? There are no bones left. It's impossible that a legal-sized bone, the size of a barley, which is the minimum amount to offer tumah, it's impossible that type of sized bone remained behind after trampling Shalei Nidash Beregel, which wasn't trampled upon and disintegrated by way of that traffic. So these are kulais, even though we don't know with certainty, but it's a kulais because the whole idea is the Rabbanan. So that proves our point that the entire concept is the Rabbanan, and that explains why this child turned adult is Nema. Ve'ad kan hayinu bonim b'Shabbos. This child, the turned adult, claims, well, I remember in my youth, we used to walk on Shabbos until this point, and he's Neman Kosavar Tchumen de Rabbanan. Our mission is following the Shita. It's Machlekes Tanaim and Saita. Our mission is following the Shita that Tchumen is the Rabbanan, and therefore he can set the boundaries. But Ve'ein Neman Loimar Derech Hayil Plenim Makam Hazeh Mama the Mispit Hayil Plenim Makam Hazeh. But when it comes to Dinei Mamnes, financial claims, he can't have input. My time and why? Afukim Amayna Lamafkiran. You can't force monetary change of hands. You can't extract money based on this fellow's testimony because he's not offering testimony which he experienced when he was an adult. Tan Rabbanan, now the Brisa will add 3 more examples of halachis where this child is Neman. Neman atinak leimar kach amar li abba. This child turned adult is Neman to say, well, my father used to tell me mishpacha zu tahira, mishpacha zu tameya. This family is good, this family is tummy. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. These terms are sort of out of context. Tahira or tameya, sakadaitach. What does Tamei and Tar have to do with families? Ella, rather, let's revise. Mishpacha zu keshera, u'mishpacha zu pesula. My father used to point to this family. Oh, that's a proper family. We can interact with them. We can intermarry with them. But the other mishpacha has issues, questionable issues, yichus there. We have to keep away from them. And he's believed to speak about these things. And the Farshim asks, what do you mean? This is din d'oraisa? Why is this, this incomplete edus sufficient for this type of halacha to consider a family puzzle? That's serious business. So some learn, was speaking that it was known that there was one family good, one family not. So amongst these two, one of them were no good, and he's just verifying which one it is. That's one approach. Others say that we're not speaking about actually consider them puzzle. He's just good enough to, add precaution. This way we can keep away as an extra precaution, but of course, it doesn't really affect their status minat Torah. Fine. So this is one thing that he's believed on. Number two, v'shachalnu. I remember we had a whole feast. Shachalnu b'ktsata shabas pleni l'pleni. There was some sort of ktsata celebration, which the Gemara will explain soon, which took place when Bas Pleni married Pleni. We were involved in that, and this proves some point, as we're going to see soon. Number three, he's believed to speak about Kahuna. I remember my father used to send us with the dough portion of the challah portion of the dough, the challah, the matanos, whether it's truma, etc., which belong to the kohen. We used to go deliver to the kohen. The atzma, only if he claims that he was personally delivered. But it was delivered by himself personally, so he was personally involved. But not if he claims that there were others involved, because perhaps he didn't pay such close attention. So if it's something personal, yes, he's believed. So 3 more examples of ne'emanos. However, the kulan in all these cases, it only works if he was Jewish from the get-go. He was a Yisrael katan, which turned into a gadol. But im haya oived kechavim, v'nis gayer. Let's say he's a ger, and he claims that he noticed these things. He observed these things when he was still a guy. Or another variation would be eved v'nishtachrer. He's now a released slave, and he claims that he experienced these things when he was an eved. Ein ne'emanah, in this case, he's not believed. There's no ne'emanis pertaining to an experience which he claims happened when he was a guy or an eved. Likewise, even a Yisrael who is now an adult is not trusted when he speaks about derech hoya lepleni b'makom hazeh, ma'amad or mispad hoya lepleni b'makom hazeh. Again, financial matters, that is not believed. However, Rabbi Yehuda Kessler Omer ne'emana, they are believed. What's Rabbi Yehuda going on? Rabbi Yehuda Haya, which shalacha is he referring to? He is believed. Which one is he talking about? Ilay Mas Sefer. Is it on the most recent halacha, which pertains to dinei mamanus? How could that be? He's trying to extract money. It's financial claims, financial matters. He's not believed unless you have proper edim. Ella Reisha. Rabbi Yehuda referring back to the previous case, where the Tanakama learned, if he claims that he noticed, that he experienced, that he observed when he was a guy or an eved, he's not believed. On that, Rabbi Yehuda, and I maintain he is believed. My kamiflagi, what's the point of machlekes? What is it based on? Tanakama savar, Tanakama holds he's not believed. You know why? Since he claims that he experienced this thing when he was a guy, we don't give it too much credibility. Perhaps he wasn't paying such close attention, especially if these are, Jewish-related topics. Who's to say that he paid close attention? He was not medayik. It's not reliable. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, he holds no. Even the Daitel Yuri, since way back before he actually turned a ger, he had it within him. He was driving in that direction. The Gemara in Shabbos says that even a ger's neshama was at Har Sinai. He had it within him. He was already sort of leaning in this direction. Made the kavadayik. We can assume that he was paying close attention, even though they were Jewish-related topics. He was already into it. And the Mefarshim add the same thing with the Eved, because he knows that his master will let him go. He pays close attention to the facts, and therefore, when he relates them later, he's reliable. One more thing to verify, which is the Ktsatsa. My Ktsatsa, his fellow claimed that he experienced a Ktsatsa. What is that? The Tana Rabban. Ktsatsa. How does this happen? So we have a family of brothers. One brother strays a bit. Shenasa isha she'ena hagenas la. He marries a woman who is not suitable for him, isha who is usher to him. The brothers want to protest. They want to disengage from him to ensure that their descendants don't intermarry. So what do? They make a public proclamation. Boy, b'nei mishpacha, family members come along. U'mevi'in chavis milei peres. They bring along a barrel filled with peres, perhaps as a message. This is a remes to offspring. They break it right in the middle of the town square, and they proclaim as follows: Achenu beis Yisrael shimu. Listen closely, our fellow Jews. Achinu pleni. Our brother, so-and-so, Nasa Yishosha in Hagenasla, he married somebody unsuitable for him. We were very concerned, perhaps our descendants willing to marry. In order to avoid that, we're going to make a public proclamation which will have an everlasting effect. Boy ukhulochem dugma. Come, allow us to proclaim something for all generations. You should know we want to keep away shleis arev zarei b'zarenu, so that our children don't intermarry. V'zohi ktsatsa shatinoik neman l'hoid aleh. In fact, this is the ktsatsa event which that child turned adult is neman to speak about. I remember I was part of this ktsatsa, and this proves his point and allows us to label the other family as per his claim, his description of events. Okay, let's back up, make a quick chazara. So regarding yichud with an isha who was a shvuya, the Gemara says, well, mekel, they could even live in the same chatzah, provided they take precaution not to even be misyachad with each other. However, if a fellow divorces his wife and then she remarries, don't even live together in the same shechuna. Furthermore, if he was a kohen, so even if she's as yet unmarried, that's even more severe, more tempting. Even in the same mavoi, they should not be found. Who has to move away? Who has to be displaced? Typically it's her, because it's more difficult for the man than the woman, except in a case where it's her area. She owns the home in this chutzner and he's just a guest. In which case, she takes priority. A former husband and wife come to Din Torah, we totally disapprove. They should have, a go-between. This only applies if they were married and then divorced. But only engaged, that's not a concern, unless we see indicators otherwise. A katan, who is now a gadol, can testify about something he had observed when he was yet a child, provided we're speaking about din and the Rabbanon. We have 5 examples in the Mishnah, another 3 in the Brisa, but pertaining to din mamris or other halachas deraisa, in that case you need proper edus. All the best to you and much hatzlacha.